Coming off the Pixel ad in the Super Bowl, for this Valentine's Day special, we go deep inside the Android 14 developer preview. We got leaks of upcoming phones from Motorola, Sony, and Samsung, plus your email and voicemails on this week's All About Android.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is All About Android, episode 617, recorded Tuesday, February 14th, 2023, inside Android 14 Dev Preview. This episode of All About Android is brought to you by Warden. Get the password manager that offers a robust and cost-effective solution that can drastically increase your chances of staying safe online. Get started with a free trial of a Teams or Enterprise plan, or get started for free across all devices as an individual user at bitwarden.com/twit. And by Cashfly. Cashfly is the only CDN built for throughput, delivering rich media content up to 10 times faster than traditional delivery methods and 30% faster than other major CDNs. Learn how you can get your first month free at cashfly.com. Welcome to All About Android, your weekly source for the latest news, hardware, and apps for the Android faithful. I'm Ron Richards.
I'm Huyen Twit Dao.
And I'm Michelle Rahman.
And there you are. We are your three guides to the world of Android today, tonight, this week, tomorrow, at least till next week. Jason
Whenever
is
you're
off.
listening to this.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever you're listening to this. Jason is off having a wonderful vacation with his family. If you follow him on social media, you see they're having a great time skiing. We wish he was here, but we're so glad he's having a good time. But we're excited because Michelle's got a lot to talk about Android 14 tonight. All right.
Mm-hmm.
We got a lot of leaks. We got some Samsung stuff. It's a whole bunch of good Android stuff. And hopefully I vamped enough to give Burke enough time to plan for the news bumper, because now it is time for Android news.
Well, kind of. And it looks like we've removed Jason with the Pixel 7.
Oh, man. Matt, see,
dear.
there you go. You had it. You see, if you didn't do kind
He's
of.
here
but
with
you
us in spirit.
Jason has been magic erased, unfortunately. So there it is. Michelle, Huyen, did you watch the Super Bowl this past weekend? I'm sorry, the big game this past weekend?
I sure did. Oh, yeah. I can't say that.
Can't
watch
say
the
Super
big
Bowl.
game.
No. You watched the big game?
Big game.
Yeah, watch the big game.
Did you see the fixed on Pixel ad that ran during it?
Yeah. It's great. We talked about this. I don't think we talked about it in the show, but we had talked about it in chat when Google, like last week, put out some message where yet again there was like a blue bubble talking to a green bubble and asking, I think it was like the blue bubble asking the green bubble, "Can you fix this for me?" And they're like, "Oh, you got to wait until like February 12th or whatever, or 13th or something, whatever it is." And I think we were like vaguely speculating on what that could be. And I was expecting more, to be perfectly frank. Just expecting a little more for all that.
I don't know. I know, and we talked about it a little leading up to the show. And so what I'm referencing here is that Google ran a commercial during the big game, during the Super Bowl, and it's up on YouTube. They posted on the Google blog and on YouTube before the game, as like all the brands do now. Like you don't need to watch the game anymore. You can just see all the commercials before the game. And so they came out with an ad for a campaign that is called Fixed on Pixel, and it featured, Amy Schumer and a basketball player whom I'm not familiar with, and someone else I'm not familiar with named Doja Cat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But anyway, so I guess it's relevant to the kids. But yeah, and it was, an ad for Pixel that focused on Magic Eraser and Unblur and basically the features of the camera in the Pixel 7. And so when I understand, I get where you're coming from as one of us, where you kind of expect more, but I got to say, the only thing that any by normal, I mean, just like random person in a deli in New York that has asked me about my Pixel 7 has before this ad we talked about on the show was the Magic Eraser. Like during the World Cup, they advertised Pixel heavily on that. And the guy in the deli was like, "Oh, you got one of those phones that can fix your photos? Show me how that works." So I think they're leaning into their differentiator in the marketplace. I don't know. Michelle, what do you think?
No, I definitely think this was a clever. I mean, this is the best feature they could have marketed at the Super Bowl, because it's definitely like the one you can talk about with your friends or like on social media, like the kind of thing that goes viral. You know, you just post like a before and after of a photo that you fixed on a Pixel, you know, using Magic Eraser. And I think that's something that is something that anyone can really relate to. Like, I think Google could have done a better job at marketing its features in the past, you know, like things like car crash detection, right? Everyone thinks iPhone now did it first when like Pixel has had it for years. And like, we haven't seen that many commercials or marketing out of Google for it, but now we're seeing that happen with Magic Eraser, and they chose the perfect time to really put it on full blast. And I definitely think it was the right thing to choose to, you know, put front and center. You know, for us, we've been like inundated with it. We're familiar with it. We've known about it for years. So it's like, it's not that exciting anymore, right? Because we've already known about it for so long. But there's a lot of people who've probably never even heard of a Pixel phone, and now they're aware that it can do something that the iPhone can't do.
Exactly. And it's going like super main, like you don't get more mainstream than a Super Bowl ad. Right. So well, when I get where you're coming from, that you expected more. Like, I actually thought this was pretty successful and like sells the phone, and like it doesn't lean on Android. This is something that the Pixel 7 can do. And it's, you know, it's more to push the phone rather than the operating system, which I think makes sense. I don't know. But I don't know. For Super Bowl ads, I thought it worked. Although,
I mean, that's kind of what the Super Bowl ad is, like a spectacle, right? And I do agree. Yeah. Like, I'm not trying to be like total Debbie Downer that it is the place to spend lots of money on marketing where you're going to get eyeballs on it. But I guess I kind of was anticipating something that would maybe unlock so as like an enthusiast, I'm kind of like biased, but I also feel like I kind of always kind of wish these features are obviously meant to sell pixels, but I kind of like it when software is available on more than just one phone. But that's just me.
Well, yeah, but that's capitalism right there. You're walking right into a capitalism trap. So yeah. Well, anyway, so go on YouTube, watch it, check it out for yourself. I will say that they took some dramatic license with the actual Magic Eraser functionality, and that was a little more VFX wizardry than Magic Eraser going on there. But it gets the point across, I guess. Yeah. All right. So, but that said, after we finished the show last week, sure enough, the next day something happened. So Michelle, you've been on the front lines of this. Why don't you tell us about the Android 14 developer preview 1?
Oh boy. So so there's two parts to this, right? There's the official blog post from Google announcing Android 14 developer preview 1. And, you know, there's a couple of developer focused changes and new APIs and things that are, you know, available for developers that you can read about. But of course, for users, none of that is that interesting, because of course, this is like developer preview. You're only supposed to be installing this if you are a developer testing your application. And even then, there are a lot of changes that, you know, won't really be applicable for a lot of developers. Like, so you got to read through the post and find out what's actually relevant to my app and to my workflow and, you know, what I'm doing. But that being said, Android 14 is a new major release of the OS, and there's always a whole lot more going on under the hood. And so when Google publicly released the developer preview images for the Pixel, I decided to take a look, installed it on my phones, went through all the applications, you know, the system apps, everything in it, to find out what's actually new in the new release that, you know, isn't being talked about yet, but could be coming in a future release. And I think, you know, I've published, I think, 11 articles so far, and I don't think we had time to talk about all of them in depth, but there are a couple of highlight changes that I wanted to talk about. So the first one is the app cloning feature. I think that's the one that's gotten the most attention. So if you use a phone from Samsung or an OEM or one of the other, you know, third-party device makers, you probably are familiar with an app cloning feature. You can, you know, have two instances of one app simultaneously. So in this example, you can see the screenshots. We have two instances of Discord. Native Android hasn't supported this functionality since forever, right? If you wanted to clone an app, you had to either, you know, actually repackage the app so that Android will allow you to install a second copy of it, or you'd have to create like a work profile, which would allow you to install it onto that profile. But of course, it's kind of janky to set up a work profile, even though you're not actually using it for work profile purposes, right?
And I have a work profile on my phone for my work, and it's so annoying. I just wish I could add it as a regular account. It's so frustrating. But anyway,
yeah.
we're there. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is actually taking advantage of functionality that Android added in Android 12, but Google is now like building on that to actually make it usable for users. So like there's, as you saw in the screenshots, there's a new settings page for cloning applications. And what they have yet to add is launcher integration. So on your home screen, there's no way to differentiate between the original app and the cloned app. So that's kind of a problem right now and something we may see addressed in a future developer preview or beta. So one downside or one limitation of this feature as it's currently working is that the list of apps that you can clone is actually hard coded in the OS. So you can't just like say, I want to clone whatever app I install from Google Play. It's right now determined by the OEM, which is a bit of a bummer, but I'm sure there's going to be workarounds for that once this feature is publicly available, or if it's publicly available, because it's not enabled yet in the developer preview. It's something that I had to enable to show off. That's the first major feature that I think people are interested in. The second one is the new predictive back gesture. So I say new, but if you've been watching the show for a while, you've probably already heard about this one before. So in Android 13, Google introduced the predictive back gesture system. What this does is it basically enables the system to know ahead of time what task basically will be coming out next in the so-called back stack. So when you're like swiping through, tapping on pages within an app, the system keeps track of where you're going so that it knows where you're going back whenever you go, whenever you tap the back button or you swipe back. But the problem was it didn't have a perfect picture of what would actually happen when you hit back. So what Google is basically doing, it's kind of complicated to explain it, but they're basically working with developers. It's something developers actually have to support, so that the system knows always what's going to happen whenever you do the back button. And because it knows where the back button will take you, it's able to play this transition animation that you're seeing right now so that it can basically peek and show you like a little preview of where you're going to be going when you actually finish the back gesture. In Android 13, the predictive back animation, it only supported going back to the home screen. So you could swipe back and you would see that this back gesture would take me back to the home screen. In Android 14, they're upgrading this so that you can actually have a preview when you're going between apps or within apps, as you can see here. So it's kind of it's something that we've already known about. Google's already talked about this at I/O. They've shown examples of it. So this is just something we've been expecting for a while, and we're finally seeing the fruits of that go live soon in Android 14. Of course, this is something developers will have to support in their apps. And if they don't, Google warns that things may be broken. So I don't know about you, When what is your take on predictive back? Like, how are y'all faring with this?
I mean, I love it. Like, I think the fact, so when I first heard about it and like, you know, the first thing we heard was like back to home. It was like, oh, well, that's nice, but that's kind of a very specific use case. But the fact that it now works for all, like, you know, across both like various screens of the app and back to home, I would hope that it would encourage people to do that. Cause that's actually for I mean, just even at a very base level, that looks really good, right? That's real sexy. And it is giving the user information, and I think a lot of times on apps that I've worked on, one of the complaints that we got, especially kind of at my old job, was that people kind of didn't know, even if they were on a familiar screen in apps, depending on how complicated your app is, or whether, you know, you do things like link from notifications where you can kind of like jump into like a workflow or you know, whatever your various use cases are, people can kind of get a little confused about what back means. So I'm actually really excited about it. And I, you know, it's kind of easy as a developer across many of my projects to kind of just from up until now to have let back navigation just be bad is kind of like a foregone conclusion, because it can be hard to implement. It can be hard to make it look good. But I think given that this is in there, it's sort of being forced on us more or less. I mean, it's not going to kill your app, but it's, you know, when you compare someone that does support it with someone who won't, there'll be a big difference. And the fact that, you know, if you're like doing your homework and you're updating to the latest like Jetpack and whatever, you should be covered. I'm excited for it, and I honestly can't wait. Like, and for us, for like devs that want to do like the right thing, sometimes things like this that are a little bit flashy, a little bit more user facing, can be a much easier sell to be like, hey, I need to spend 2 weeks to kind of fix this. So I'm all for it. I can't wait. I'm ready to get that sexy little like little peek when someone does it back on any of the apps I work on. So thumbs up.
I just find it fascinating that we're here at like almost that version 14 and we're still working on back gesture. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like
know. I know.
Right? I feel like at least every other year with every other version of Android, we talk about the back, like whether it was like eliminating the back button on the bottom, adding it back, eliminating it again, adding in gestures, like all this sort of stuff. I mean, it's funny. It's funny when you think about it from an intellectual standpoint of like user interface design, it's like it's a problem that it seems like such a simple. Well, go back from where you are, but like to the point you made, what does back mean? Back within the app, back to the OS, back to the home screen, but and so I just find it's kind of the kind of thing I don't think we'll ever truly solve. But
that is all true. You think it's simple, and then someone comes at you, and you're like, I didn't think about that. I don't know. And then a lot of times, like you said, like where should I be going varies. The opinion varies from person to person. So it's again compromise on what's going to piss the fewest people off if we do a thing. So yeah, 2023, back still a thing. I think it's always going to be kind of a thing. Just say.
Well,
that surely can't be it, Michelle, right? There's got to be more.
Oh no, far from it. The next one is actually, I swear I didn't know this before. People say this is a feature that iOS already had. Well, I'm not the iOS guy. I'm the Android guy, so I had no idea. But this next feature...
Look at him feigning ignorance right here.
So this next feature, basically, so right now, a lot of social media applications, well, not just social media applications, but a lot of applications in general, whenever they ask for permission to access your gallery, so like your photos or videos, they get permission to access your entire gallery. So all of your photos or all of your videos. Well, wouldn't it be nice if you could just say no, if you could just say, I'll decide which photos and videos this app will have access to. Well, that's exactly what this new feature in Android 14 seems to be enabling. So what Google is working on is a new menu item in the permission dialog. So whenever an app asks you for access to photos and videos, you'll have a new option in that dialog that says select photos. And when you tap that, it'll open the photo picker that was introduced in Android 13. And then it'll let you select which photos and videos you want to give that app access to. So this is actually a really clever solution. And again, I had no idea this was something iOS already did. So I don't know truly how clever it really is, but nevertheless, it's still a really, really good feature. But basically, like one of the problems with the photo picker as it was introduced is that it required apps to actually opt in and support it. It wasn't like a difficult thing to support. It was just like a single intent. I don't really have the time to explain that, but like it was not really a complicated API to support. The photo picker had some limitations, of course, but overall, it was very user-friendly in a privacy preserving way. So like it would let you pick what photos and videos to give apps access to, and the app that invoked the photo picker didn't need to have any permissions whatsoever. So the app that used it didn't have to be able to read anything on your gallery. You could pick whatever you want to give access to, and everyone's happy. But the problem is a lot of apps didn't use it, or they for one reason they didn't want to use it. Maybe they wanted to have access to your gallery for tracking or whatever purposes, or maybe they didn't like the way the photo picker worked. Maybe they didn't like some of the limitations, whatever. There's many different valid reasons that they may not want to implement it. But this feature in Android 14 is giving you, the user, the choice of whether or not you want to limit an app's access or you want them to have full access.
All right. I mean, this is interesting to a certain degree, but this comes down to, as we all permissions and access and stuff like that, it continues to evolve and get more locked down, I guess. Right. So, well, the next point you have, Michelle, is one that I've been keeping an eye on.
Oh yeah. The Find Delete carrier installed. So it's actually less exciting than it actually sounds. So what Android 14, I mean, it sounds exciting, but when you actually think about it, it's not that exciting because it basically just makes something you could have already done a little easier. So basically what Android 14 is introducing is this new system service called background install control. What this does is it scans for apps that have been silently installed in the background, and it puts them in a list. And it says, here are some apps that were installed in the background. They may have been installed by your carrier or OEM, and you may not need them. So here's a list. If you want to uninstall them, go ahead. That's basically all it does. It's just putting it together a list of apps that you may not want. And of course, that's kind of surprising functionality to have, considering, the amount of preloads a lot of devices come with nowadays. And, now Android is giving you this menu to say, hey, you can get rid of all of these if you want. Of course, there's still some limitations. You can't actually uninstall apps that are actually preloaded in the system image, that ships on your device. Like, you can't get rid of apps on the OS itself, because those are like baked into the firmware. But if, say, you insert a carrier SIM card, and then some app starts triggering the installation of like 17 other apps. Like, I pulled up an example in the article where someone said they inserted a certain carrier SIM card, and then all of a sudden 17 apps got installed onto their device. That's not like native functionality of Android. It's probably something like the OEM and the carrier worked out like an agreement on how to implement. But that's probably, I think everyone would agree, that is bloatware. You don't want all those apps just because you inserted the carrier SIM card, right? So this service would detect those apps and then give you a nice list from which you can uninstall them.
I like it. The OS is giving you a naughty list, like this carrier was a little bit like sneaking around behind your back, doing some nefarious things, and they got put on like a naughty list. I think more like a Santa Claus list, not like any kind of like, serious list, but like, these apps did it bad, and I like it. Just cause it gets kind of like just section off. Anyway, I think it's funny and I love it. I do love it, because I think sometimes, given how much like pre-installed apps we have and how many apps that I know I install just from trying stuff out, gets confusing. I like this a lot. I'm into it.
Yeah, it's a good one. All right, so Michelle, of the other, you dug so deep into this. I would love to hear like a couple more things you think is interesting, and then your total takeaway of Developer Preview 1, just kind of like if you had to grade it to a certain degree.
Right. So there's one more feature I'll quickly highlight, and it's the, basically, if you're familiar, like last year, Google kind of forced developers to fill out this form, this data safety form, basically saying, what data are you collecting and why are you collecting it? And
I had to personally fill out the form for my app. I went through the whole process myself, just to try it and to see what it was like, but also had to do it because if we didn't do it by a deadline, they would have pulled our app from the store. So
yeah, it was definitely a requirement. Like every app, pretty much, if you've updated an app or you submit a new app, you have to fill out this form. You have to state what you're doing with data and why you're collecting it. And that data, that information that you submit right now, it's only in the Google Play Store. But it looks like in Android 14, that information may be more front and center to users. So I spotted a new settings page where you can see apps that have updated their data safety information. And I also spotted basically a section in the location permission where you can see what data safety information that developer has submitted for that app. So for example, when you're going to grant an app the location permission, if that app has a data safety label on Google Play and they say that we're using location for advertising or, app functionality, it'll say that directly in the permission dialog. You don't have to go to Google Play and look at the data safety information there. It'll be front and center in Android itself. Of course, this functionality hasn't landed in Android 14 DP1. It's not something you can install and see immediately. It's something that I enabled. So there's no guarantee this will actually be a feature of Android 14, but that's the whole caveat and disclaimer with all this Developer Preview 1 for Android 14. This is the first inning, right? Like we've seen other developer previews where come through where we see functionality that doesn't make it to the final release, right? So now the clock is ticking on a lot of these functionality to see what makes it through the gauntlet when they eventually do roll out Android 14 later this year. Well, that is true, but it's not like Google's throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks with DP1. Like they already have a roadmap. They have a good idea of what they want to do. Whether or not they can complete it in time before they have to say, okay, we got to cut things off and wait for the next release, or we'll just scrap it entirely. So a lot of these features, of course, they've been working on them for a while. It's not like they did it a week before DP1's release.
No, but we've seen that in the past. like scope storage. Yeah. I feel like there's been other stuff that has been they wanted to get it in. They saw it, how it worked out. They said, oh, it's not ready for Prime. Then they pulled it and then it was in the next version or that sort of thing. So yeah. You just got to caveat
So
all
this is
that,
just
that anything can happen at this point. So
this is a preview of what can come. Like all these articles
Right.
are just showing off things that are in DP1 but may not be publicly available in the stable release. So these are just things, if you're a developer or user, just keep an eye on. I'll share updates as I learn more information, of course, but I can't guarantee that all of these features will be available.
Right. All right. So overall, what did you think of Developer Preview 1 so far after being with it for almost a week?
On the surface, it's not that different from Android 13, but it's definitely shaping up to be a pretty big release. It's hard for me to put together a full idea of how big it really is because I'm still digging through it, still learning about new things every day. But I do think a lot of the changes that are coming are really big, like the predictive back overhaul. App cloning will be really useful, all the other stuff. So I do think it's going to be a pretty exciting release.
All right. And at what point do you install developer previews on your phone? Do you do it at all? Do you wait for release?
Oh, goodness.
Like Jason would install this from the get-go if he were here. I wait for final release, right? So where do you see? Jason installed it and now he's gone. So, but yeah, but at what point do you jump on the next version?
Oh, goodness. For previous teams I've been on, it's kind of been like a community thing. And usually I tend to think of releases in the context of my job and what that might mean for, things that we might have to accommodate or check for, like just make sure we don't have any regressions or things like that. So generally, I don't really rush to add to load the developer preview, especially on my main driver. I really should be more active, but I also feel like usually my Pixel is my main driver. Not this year. I got this fold this tear. So, but I generally am pretty cautious about it, and also I think for us, for me, I usually wait till a little bit closer just because I want things to be a little more baked. I also don't want to either kind of prematurely panic or, kind of think that something is a bug or something is like a regression with it in an early developer release. And then we kind of run around with like chickens with their heads cut off trying to fix it when it's kind of like a Google problem, not an us problem. So I generally wait. I'll probably kind of maybe in the summer look more seriously into installing it into like a daily driver or, a very, like one of my work test phones. But usually these first couple, I'll kind of just wait and see. I'm not the most I don't know, maybe on the ball developer out there, but usually at a previous team, we'd have at least maybe our QA folks install it just to get an idea of hey, does our app absolutely die as soon as, we have the developer preview in there? Or is okay, things look okay. We seem to be all right. We can kind of chill, and relax a little bit. So it's just more like putting your foot in the water and seeing if something bites it. If it does, then kind of just keeping our eyes open. So.
Sure. Well, before we move on, Michelle, there was one other one I wanted to flag in here, which was the tell everybody about the third-party app stores aspect of it.
So basically, there's just some new APIs to make third-party app stores work a little better. Basically, third-party app stores now have the ability to tell when you're actively using an app, so that they don't update it, and break whatever you're doing. And then there's another API that lets third-party app stores take ownership over updates of an app. So that, say, if you installed an app from a third-party app store and you also have that app is available through Google Play, you can say, I want updates to only be exclusively delivered through that third-party app store and not through Google Play, or vice versa. And then there's one more thing where you can also have user pre-approval, where if a third-party app store deems it necessary that they want to prompt the user before doing an automatic update, they can do that. So all in all, just some nice quality of life improvements to improve the experience for third-party app stores on Android. Because right now, you have to be a pre-installed first-party app store to have access to a lot of the same privileged APIs that Google Play and the Galaxy App Store have access to. But they're kind of slowly bridging that gap between third-party and first-party app stores.
Which is interesting because the even concept of that years ago was just inconceivable, right? So it's fascinating to see how far we've come, but eventually we'll go, I guess, if it makes it to the final release. So, all right, cool. Well, so much more about Android 14. Michelle, where can people go find more of your analysis on this stuff?
I'm posting everything on my Twitter at Mishal Rahman, as you can see on the ticker at the bottom. But the articles themselves are currently on XDA developers. So if you just look on XDA developers on my author profile, you'll see all of the Android 14 content that I've published. I'm temporarily publishing on XDA as a freelancer, not like rejoining them full time. I had that question asked a lot. But if you just want to follow me for Android 14 coverage, there's a lot of things that I haven't posted about on XDA. Just follow me on Twitter for all that content.
Right on. All right, cool.
Or Telegram, Mastodon, whatever. I know Twitter is something still a hot topic these days.
It's still pretty active, I know. But anyway, all right, cool. So go follow Mishal if you want more of the Android 14 developer preview deets. But there was some Android 13 developments that happened today, right, Huynh? What happened today?
Yeah, so Google is in the process of taking cookies away. Not the good, delicious kind, but actually, so Google's been in, thank goodness, we would need some in case, but really it's about third-party tracking cookies, and they've been, working on kind of killing third-party cookies for tracking in web and on Chrome. But today they've actually launched a beta of what they deem the Privacy Sandbox, which is a toolkit for basically improving privacy. And I love the title of this article, which was Google launches way for Android apps to track you without tracking you. So Google has been trying very hard to, again, follow the modern environment or the modern zeitgeist of trying to improve privacy. And of course, they're never going to, not try to serve you ads and not give advertisers information about you, but they're trying to make it a little bit harder for advertisers to get very specific information about you. So they did have like an initiative last year, which, they had this thing called I got to look this up because this is not a very interesting or very easy to remember name, but the Federated Learning of Cohorts tracking mechanism. So yeah, they were trying to replace third-party cookies with this FLOC thing, which they got kind of slammed for because it actually allowed advertisers to find out even more information about you, like I think even your IP address and things like that. So they've really tried to, respond to the feedback and also paint themselves as a non-anti-competitive player in the market. And again, abide by kind of consumer welfare. And they just released a beta of this Privacy Sandbox, which is basically a toolkit with several components. Some of it has to do with things like SDK runtime. Basically, as developers, we often kind of use other kind of software toolkits to add things like, say, AdSense, which is relevant in this, but things like maybe like if you're using Stripe, they have an SDK that allows you to take payments to the app. So there's all these kind of like third-party software that even devs utilize and leverage to kind of bring you functionality, but they're also really good vectors for, malicious code and things like that. So part of this, Privacy Sandbox is what is known as this SDK runtime feature, where it basically gets to run in a siloed part of your phone's operating system instead of within apps themselves, kind of providing a little bit of like a buffer between you and any nefarious SDKs, and kind of more relevant to the story and kind of more relevant to the idea of third-party cookies and how, advertisers try to figure out what kind of ads to serve you, what your habits are. They have like two tools now. There's two APIs that are new that the idea is that Google wants to still give advertisers information about what you like and are interested in for the purposes of serving you ads, but to not to reveal as little specific information about you as possible and to not share that information about external parties. So your phone's still paying attention to what you're saying, but the promise of these APIs is that these APIs will kind of figure out what you like. Like, do you like sports? Do you like shoes? Do you like makeup? And rather than kind of being specific about what you do, your activity, and what you like, more just kind of generating hey, this person is into this thing, and then communicating that more generalized-ish information to advertisers. So there's two APIs. One is topics. These topics are basically categories that can apply to you based on apps that you use. So for example, I have a fitness timer app, and I have like a weight tracking app. So presumably topics will think, Huynh likes fitness and things like that. And we'll be able to communicate, hey, this user is into fitness, or this kind of like group of users is into fitness. So it's more about based on what an app is and how an app like identifies or categorizes itself, kind of relating those to interests. And then there's another API called Fledge, which is more of a way for an app to kind of tag interactions within within its own like interactions. But it's more like kind of the app saying, hey, like based on what the app user is doing, here's something that they like. So it's more like the app itself rather than being a category into it of itself. It's like the app tagging certain things that you do to kind of relate it to ads that you might like. So, and then finally, there's attribution reporting, which is basically a system that lets advertisers know how well their ads are working, which is not that interesting to sound like, but it is kind of like a big deal and part of why, publishers and advertisers presumably want your information. They just want to know, like, if it's working. Is this ad working? Is that Super Bowl ad going to sell more pixels? Presumably. So, all of this is open for beta today. It's only available for app developers that signed up for the beta, I think back in November. And there is a developer preview still going forward, which will continue to kind of iterate with new features and things like that. But this is kind of what Google is putting out there as a way to replace third-party cookies and tracking and try to again, still provide information about you, but not really specific information about you. So, I mean, it's not a perfect world, right? I know a lot of us would rather just know what we're doing, but for Google, that's, for a company just driven by ad revenue, they're trying to kind of maybe close maybe fill some holes where privacy might be concerned. So I don't know. Does any of this sound interesting? Better world? Ready to clear those cookies forever?
Privacy is always a hot topic. Michelle, I'm curious what you think.
What I find more interesting is actually the mechanism that they're actually delivering these APIs. So if you read the blog post, you'll notice that they said that this is available on select Android 13 devices. But if you will recall, Android 13, the stable release was back in August of last year, right? August, I think. And the platform stability phase was reached like a couple of months before. So that means it shouldn't have been possible for Google to add new APIs to the Android 13 platform. So how did they end up doing that? Well, thanks to a thing you may have heard of called Project Mainline, they're able to actually deliver new APIs to devices through an Google Play system update. So that's why these Android 13 devices or these new Privacy Sandbox APIs are only available on select Android 13 devices that have received a recent Google Play system update that brings these new Privacy Sandbox APIs to them. It's not available on all Android 13 devices out of the box, but if you have a recently updated Google Play system update version on your Android 13 device, then these APIs may be available. And of course, there's also the opt-in aspect. As Wynn said, you have to have a device that's been selected as part of Google's A/B test, because of course, there's an A/B test.
Right. I love that point you brought up though, because that Project Mainline, I know like when it first got announced, it's a very highly technical thing. And if you try to explain it to someone kind of like just your average person, it's hard to see like the value of it, especially when it was first announced. But, I think, between this and the photo picker and other things that are just able to kind of, we're able to slot in improvements, like large scale improvements to the OS. It's really fun to see that kind of play out. You know what I'm saying? Like a few years later and, part of like the whole fragmentation thing or the part of like, issues with backwards compatibility can be solved in part by this. So I love that you brought that up. And yeah, that's a really cool point that Mainline just keeps on giving, and it will continue to give, hopefully, things like this. So.
It does. So, and a quick note on the Privacy Sandbox initiative on Google is that if you go to privacysandbox.com, you see their whole kind of breakdown of it. And they're already implementing this on the web within Chrome, and now this is just the implementation with Android. So this is like a Google-wide kind of initiative thing, and applying the same concept, the same product name, the same approach to every platform that they're on, which honestly, knowing what we, after tracking Google for the past, almost 15 years now, it's nice to see kind of like a unified approach, right? Versus just like, here's the privacy approach on Android and we're doing another thing over here on the web. Like at least they're finally starting to get the left hand and the right hand working together. So interesting. All right, good. Well, good. Yay for privacy. There you go. All right. Well, excellent. So we are going to bid adieu to Mishal. Thanks for joining us for the first part of the show. It's always great to have you on.
Oh, thanks for having me. I always love talking about Android. And of course, this being Android, the week after Android 14, perfect time to come back onto the show.
Perfect time for you for sure. And we already told people where they can find you, follow you on Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. So thanks for joining us, Mishal. And I'm sure next time you're on, Jason's going to want to talk about developer preview more. So I'm sure we're going to get even deeper into preview 2 when that comes out. So, but yes, Jason is not with us.
We've magic erased him from the show. He'll be back though. We'll just hit revert, undo.
Exactly. So, all right, Michelle, well, have a great night. And for those of you sticking around, we're going to thank our first sponsor of the evening, because this episode of All About Android is brought to you by the fine folks over at Bitwarden. And Bitwarden is the only open source cross-platform password manager that can be used at home, at work, or on the go, and is trusted by millions. Even our very own Steve Gibson has switched over. And guess what? So have I. With Bitwarden, you can securely store credentials across personal and business worlds. All of your data in your Bitwarden vault is end-to-end encrypted, not just your passwords. That includes URLs for all websites you have accounts for. Bitwarden doesn't track your data in the mobile apps, only crash reporting, and even that is removed in the F-Droid installation. Bitwarden is open source and invites anyone to review library implementations at any time on GitHub, and also to review Bitwarden privacy policies at bitwarden.com/privacy. And like I mentioned, I made the jump. I switched over to Bitwarden. Password managers were in the news recently, and there was a big fallout. I took all my hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of passwords and migrated them over to Bitwarden. It was so easy, so smooth, and I feel so much more secure now that my passwords are safe, locked in my own trusted encrypted vault, and just feeling so much better about my own personal privacy thanks to Bitwarden. And you can protect your personal data and privacy at Bitwarden by adding security to your passwords with strong, randomly generated passwords for each account. Go a step further with the username generator and create unique usernames for each account, or even use any of the 5 integrated email alias services. Bitwarden offers email alias generation with simple login, Anon-Addy, Firefox Relay, Fastmail, and now DuckDuckGo. These services will allow you to create a masked email address, one that you could use for only one website, for example, and forwards any emails to your primary email account. This keeps your main email address out of databases of the services and sites you sign up for. Bitwarden is a must-need for your business. It's fully customizable and adapts to your business needs. Their Teams organization option is $3 a month per user, and their enterprise organization plan is $5 a month per user. Share private data securely with coworkers across departments or the entire company. Individuals can use their basic free account forever with an unlimited number of passwords, or upgrade anytime to their premium account for less than $1 a month. The family organization option gives up to 6 users premium features for only $3.33 a month. Bitwarden supports importing and migrating from many other programs as well. And at Twit, we're fans of password managers, and Bitwarden is the only open source cross-platform password manager that can be used at home, on the go, or at work, and is trusted by millions of individuals, teams, and organizations worldwide. Get started with a free trial of a Teams or Enterprise plan, or get started for free across all devices as an individual user at bitwarden.com/twit. That's bitwarden.com/twit. And we thank them for keeping our passwords safe, keeping us safe, being awesome. And personally, thank you, Bitwarden, for protecting all my passwords. And thanks for sponsoring this episode. And with that, we've got a whole bunch of leaks and hardware to talk about. So let's get right to it. All righty. So this one isn't a leak, but it's a launch rather. So
yeah. Okay, so we got a launch, we got some leakies. So y'all know we like foldables on the show, but we tend to have kind of a bit of a small selection. Well, that selection actually might widen, at least for some of us, some of the Android faithful, because the OPPO Find N2 Flip is coming next week, and it's a global launch. So we have briefly talked about the OPPO Find N2 and the OPPO Find N2 Flip, which are basically, OPPO, this Chinese OEM, going toe-to-toe, foldable to foldable with Samsung, at least in certain markets anyway. Both of these phones were released in China to start with, December last year. So the OPPO Find N2 Flip, which is what is going to be globally launched, looks a lot like the Samsung Z Flip 4, except looking at the exterior screen, which on the Z Flip 4 is, a kind of small horizontal oriented external screen, is actually portrait oriented on the Find N2 Flip, and is quite a bit bigger. It's actually 3.26 inches tall, which is kind of massive for a foldable exterior screen compared to the 1.9 inch tall Z Flips screen. And inside, you got things that are very comparable to the Flip itself. You've got a 6.8 screen, which refreshes at 120 hertz. And it is actually rocking the MediaTek Dimensity 9000 Plus chipset, which I know Jason and myself to some degree admitted to some bias against, but it's a great chipset, and that is what the OPPO N2 Flip is rocking. And 4300 milliamp battery, which by the way is bigger than the 3700 milliamp battery of the Z Flip. And of course, it's using OPPO's Color OS 13. Now, this phone is getting a global launch in the UK on February 15th. Not really any word about the US market, unsurprisingly. And because it's so similar to the Z Flip 4, it even has like some of the same colorways, like this really popular purple one. It'll be really interesting to see, especially maybe in more of like the Western market where it can compete, kind of head to head in a more comparable way with the Samsung foldables, what the price will be and how is it going to compare? I think I forgot how much the Z Flip, I didn't write down in my notes how much the Z Flip 4 was, but it was like $999. Z Flip, sorry, not this.
It wasn't cheap, that's for sure. Yeah,
it wasn't. Yeah. It's not cheap. Z Flip 4 price is, sorry, just Googling that real quick.
Oh, good, $999. Yeah, $999. $999. 5 nines.
$999. So $999s. So presumably, if the OPPO Find N2 wants to be competitive and go toe-to-toe with Samsung very directly in this kind of foldable space, we'll have to see whether they can price it competitively. But if you're in the UK and you like you a foldable, you just got one more option. It's just the OPPO. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's just another example of foldables. Every company's coming up with a foldable. It's like it's taken a few years, but foldables are becoming a legit portion of the marketplace. So
I'm excited. I still, when I go out and I kind of pull out my Z Fold 4, I really think there's something magic to it. And I know I think it's weird because I think there's two ends of the spectrums. You look at it and you're like, that's cute, but a little bit like extra. And there's some people that are genuinely like, oh, wow, that is really cool. Like, what phone is that? Like, who makes it? Will Apple make one is a question I get a lot. But I do like I totally agree. I think that we're getting over the tipping point. Like there's a tipping point. We're kind of leaning over and it's just leaning over and there's just more and more foldables on the other side.
Well, and I think the other example that shows, kind of mainstream of adoption is that, and it might be, product placement, but I'm seeing foldables on TV shows. Like really? I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm watching the second season of Gossip Girl on HBO Max, and one of the characters has a Samsung Flip as her primary phone. So, and maybe they product placed it. I didn't check the credits to see if there's any promotional consideration, but like, even if they didn't, then that just shows even further that it's being seen. And that's also a very, kind of fashion forward kind of show with spoiled kids on the upper East Side. But, but it can be seen as a fashion accessory. So there it is. Fascinating.
Hey, I'm going to try not to be so Debbie Downer on kind of marketing and how companies need to sell phones, because obviously Superbowl is not a bad idea, and hey, Gossip Girl is not a bad idea either, especially for something.
I wish I could say the second season was even worthy of a phone like that. But it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. It's been canceled, and I don't disagree with that decision by their side.
Oh my goodness.
All right. Well, so now we got a nice parade of leaks ahead of you for upcoming phones, and and I feel like it is that early point in the year where we're starting to see the cycle happen, and new phones get announced or get rumored about. And one of them, through the years at All About Android here, I know we've covered the Moto G series, because that really has been the forerunner of like the affordable phone, like the budget phone line, in terms of like, if you want to get someone on Android, but you don't want to spend $1,000 on a crazy flip phone or a flagship phone or that sort of thing. The Moto G has always been a solid choice to deliver a phone that's, with an OS experience that's near close to AOSP, and just a solid phone. So we've seen a couple of leaks of renders of the Moto G Stylus 2023. And it was actually released by the OnLeaks Patreon, and someone teamed up with them and took that to Twitter to get out to the world. And it shows a couple of subtle differences between last year's Moto G Stylus and what could be this year's. And it looks like the glossy back is gone and replaced with a matte material. with that texture, with that tacky kind of texture. Whether or not that makes it seem like a cheaper phone or not versus a glossy back, is up to you. We'll see it when we see it in person, but it definitely did change the design. Furthermore, they changed the camera array. So instead of 3 lenses on it for the Moto G Stylus 2023, they're going for two lenses. We've only gotten leaks of the renders. We don't know what the specs of them are. But the renders, show a 50 megapixel sensor, which is the same count found on previous generations. So probably going to be the same, but going with 2 lenses instead of 3. And then finally, the stylus silo or little spot for the stylus is in the same spot on the right bottom of the device. And the front of the display has the punch hole camera still, so consistent from previous years. And it looks like they've added the headphone jack on the 2023 model, which is will make many people happy to have that Courage port. So there it is. So so don't know prices, don't know availability, don't know specs. We're gonna keep an eye out for it, but the Moto G Stylus stepping up to be a good budget option on the Android hardware side of things. So.
All right. Well, I got another good budget option for you, and that is from the very popular Samsung Galaxy A series. This is a leaky peaky. This is a leaky peaky. This is not a materialized option yet, but of course, the A series has also been super popular among the mid-rangers, and there have been some leaks of the upcoming A54. So there's the renders don't show too much that is different, any kind of obvious changes from the A53. There are a couple things though, and we've got, speculative specs. That's a little confusing, but there's some speculation about what the specs might be. And it's kind of shrinking a little bit down to a 6.4 screen, 120 hertz. What's interesting is that, the A series is still using the Exynos chip made in-house by Samsung. There is a tiny bit more of a RAM as an option, including both a 6 and 8 gigabyte RAM. Options on the A54, 128/256 gigabytes storage, which is expandable with micro SD card. The kind of the biggest change for the cameras, which still will maintain the kind of the 3 camera array in the back, is that the main sensor is actually going from a 64 megapixel down to a 50, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the camera quality is going down. The new sensor purportedly has, better low light. Was it low? Yeah, low light. Or I wrote love light because it's Valentine's Day, so I typoed
love light
in the spirit of Valentine's.
Love light.
It reportedly has better low light and dynamic range. So, that's an option for you. And of course, as a mid-ranger, it probably won't have any wireless charging, but it does rock a 5,000 milliamp battery with 25 watt charging. Not so bad. And it will presumably launch with One UI 5.0, which of course is based on Android 13. No pricing, no release dates just yet. We're going to kind of guess around February or March, which is kind of in line with previous releases. And there is a rumor that in Europe, the A54 might actually be maybe 50 euros more expensive than the A53, which is kind of odd because the A53 was cheaper than the A52. So we're the price is kind of, doing a little bit up and down kind of dip, but still probably going to be an excellent mid-range option, which we like around here. So we're going to keep our eyes peeled for the next month or two on the A54 or for the A54.
Yeah. The thing is that we spend so, and after doing this so many years, and I feel, sometimes I feel it's a bit like Groundhog's Day and stuff like that, but we do spend so much time, talking about the flagships and talking about the foldables and talking about these really, really expensive things. And I've said it every year, around the time, is that the mid-range and the budget range is so important for Android just as a sector period, because not everyone can afford the $1,000 phone, and so I'm glad to see that Samsung, is prioritizing, Google prioritizes it, Moto prioritizes it. I think they're an important part of the marketplace. Yeah, and I forgot to mention that, this phone, kind of in the vein of other, Samsung and other manufacturers trying to give you extra support, does have 4 OS updates and 5-year security updates. So not only is it a mid-range phone that hopefully will still be quite affordable, but you can keep it for a while. So that is definitely something that we're also seeing, and I'm very glad to see that support's there. Cool.
So we got one more leaky for you. We got one more leaky peaky for you, and that is the next Sony flagship phone, which is the Xperia All right. So this is the Xperia 1.5, 1V. It's a Roman numeral. So is it 1V or is it 1.5? The Sony Xperia. Is it?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Because there's a 1IV, which is of course 1 Roman numeral 4. So what is it? Is it the
No, this
1,
is
4?
the 5 because this is the 5
Right, okay.
because
The previous one was-
the previous one was the Sony Xperia 1 IV. So which is the Xperia 1.4. So this is the 1V 1.5. Yeah. So that makes more sense.
I'm going to pronounce it V just for clarity on the audio only stream. But yeah, so if you've been an Xperia fan in the past, and I actually work with quite a few Xperia fans, and you want to hold on to that Courage port, and of course, your headphone port, and you like micro SD storage, well, then the Sony Xperia 1V will definitely be something that you're going to be excited about. The design seems mostly unchanged from the previous version, the Sony Xperia 1 IV, with kind of a more boxy design, a flat 6.5 inch display, which I mean, I'm ready for the flat displays to come back, personally speaking. But you will get in this version a triple camera island on the back and an upgrade to a 48 megapixel main sensor. So that for the previous version of the Xperia, all of the cameras were 12 megapixels, and most of them will continue to be for this next version. But you're going to get an upgrade for that main sensor to 48 megapixels. There's a fingerprint sensor embedded in the power button, and this phone will be rocking the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip, and rumoring to have like a whole lot of RAM, like a whole bunch, like 16 gigabytes. Is that right? That's a lot.
That's a lot of gigabytes.
A lot of gigabytes. So this leaky peaky does suggest that there could be announcement at the end of this month, indicating that there is a summer release for this phone. So if you're an Xperia fan, you might want to hold on to your cash for a little bit for the Xperia 1V, soon to be announced, we think. So there you go.
Hold it onto that headphone jack for sure.
Yeah, and micro SD storage.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Well, so some nice little teases of what's to come from Motorola, Samsung, and Sony as we gear up on the hardware side. But before we get into some software side and some app side, we're going to take a break and thank our next sponsor of the show, of the program for this evening, for this day. This episode of All About Android is brought to you by Cashfly. And listen, the whole world is moving to digital, and traffic patterns are spiking all over the place. Viewers don't hang around for videos that buffer, shoppers abandon carts on e-commerce sites that are slow, and gamers leave bad reviews when the latency is high. Be ready for those fluctuations with Cashfly. Expectations have risen, and customers expect a faultless experience when engaging with content on any device, anytime, anywhere in the world. A leader in CDN technology since 2002, Cashfly has held the track record for high-performing, ultra-reliable content delivery for 2 decades. Cashfly pioneered the use of TCP Anycast, an innovation that CDNs continue to build upon. Quality of experience is the single most critical metric when serving content simultaneously to a large and distributed audience on a global scale, and your delivery stack can be your secret weapon. And with Cashfly, you'll get ultra-low latency video streaming that will deliver video to more than 1 million concurrent users. You'll also get lightning-fast gaming, which will deliver downloads faster with zero lag, glitches, or outages. Mobile content optimization that offers automatic and simple image optimization so your site loads faster on any device. Multi-CDN for redundancy and failover, which intelligently balances your traffic across multiple providers, giving you the shortest routes and mitigating against performance glitches. Plus, never pay for service overlap again. Get flexible month-to-month billing for as long as you need it, and discounts for fixed terms once you're happy. Design your own contract when you switch to Cashfly. And you might be wondering, how do we know all this? Well, we've been using Cashfly for over 10 years, and we wouldn't have it any other way. With more than 3,500 clients in over 80 countries, organizations like us consistently choose Cashfly for scalability, reliability, and unrivaled performance. Cashfly is the only CDN built for throughput, delivering rich media content up to 10 times faster than traditional delivery methods and 30% faster than other major CDNs. Learn how you can get your first month free at Cashfly.com. That's Cashfly.com, and we thank them for being so awesome, speedy, getting our content to our audiences, and just generally being fantastic. Thanks, Cashfly. We appreciate your support. And with that, we've got some apps. All right, so when as we were planning the show this week, I couldn't resist dropping this in after we talked about it last week. So
yeah, it's the case of the why is my system storage so big on my Samsung phone, part deux, because we talked a little bit about it last week. And this is kind of like a different angle on it. And it's actually more of a correction or kind of a alleviation of some of Samsung's supposed guilt. So I think this week, Ars Technica and Android Authority stated that Android 13 and specifically One UI 5.0 and its bloatware was taking up 60 gigabytes of storage. And when you compare, 60 gigabytes of, system storage compared to say like Pixel 7's partition, which has like 15 gigabytes, which takes up 15 gigabytes. That's kind of crazy sounding, right? Because say that you had a 128 gigabyte model of the Galaxy S23. And sorry, my bad. This is specifically for the S23. The report was that the system storage was 60 gigabytes. So right. you could have it sounded like almost half of your storage was taken up by bloatware. Well, so apparently this is actually not the case. After some kind of review and discussion on Twitter, it does seem that this is not actually as bad as it sounds, that it's not bloatware. So what actually comes into play is something very fascinating, and that is conversion losses. So basically kilobytes, so a kilobyte is actually 1,024 bytes, not 1,000 bytes, even though it's called a kilobyte. It really should just be 1,000. But there's an extra little 24 bytes there. So because of this conversion loss, where, the stated storage and the actual kind of calculated storage by the system, because binary and all that kind of stuff, apparently OEMs like to obfuscate this discrepancy in conversion by just assigning this loss to system storage. So it's actually not bloatware. It's more like it's more like an existential space. It's like vapor space, where there's this existential corner of your phone where you have to kind of meditate on what a kilobyte actually is. That's where all that's going. So I think this makes it 7% better, which I mean is still not a little bit of space, but I find it absolutely fascinating that how you count kilobytes was leading to people getting upset. I mean, because if half of your storage, your advertised storage is in the system, that sucks. But it's absolutely fascinating that because of the way we count, there's an extra 7% of system storage attributed where it may not actually be there. So it's not so much that it's not there. It's just more like the stated manufacturer amount of storage is a little bit less than actual. And so when you look inside of your phone, the real story gets told. This is such a only in our space would this be a thing, right? Where it's it comes, where it comes down to literally first off, anybody listening or watching this show who's not aware of how many bytes are in a kilobyte, and and the 256, 512, 1024 progression, right? Yeah. I feel like that's kind of 101, right? But it's just the fact that this is how the story is ending is I think very, very amusing. So it doesn't make sense, right? Because any kind of other measurement, like a kilometer is 1,000 freaking meters. It's just cut and dry, right? That's just how the language works. Computer science a little different. We give you 1024, we give you 2056, and y'all figure it out. I love it. And now, and it's funny because you kind of always think, oh, that kind of stuff is just weird stuff from college or whatever that just sits in your head. No, it's actually peeving some people off because they noticed. And now consumers who maybe aren't aware of this weird discrepancy, and now we got to write, and now we got to talk about articles about it. Kind of awesome. Right. Just awesome. Anyway, it's very, very, very funny. So, not so funny, but also picking up a story that I feel like we talked about on recent episodes, might have been last week or the week before. But remember we were talking about Google Podcasts and Google search results, how the Google Podcast links were disappearing from the search results and that sort of thing, right? Well, that was originally spotted by podnews.net, who noted in January that when you search for a podcast, you no longer got any play buttons or links to Google Podcasts itself. And at that time, Google said the feature is working, quote unquote, as intended. But actually, there's a new announcement in Google Podcast Manager that says the feature is officially being shut down as of yesterday, February 13th.
In their update, they said Google search will stop showing podcast carousels by February 13th. As a result, clicks and impressions and how people find your show will drop to 0 after that date, the message states. And podcasters are being instructed to download any historical data they want to keep in advance of this final closure. And the thing was, like, as someone, I'm obviously a podcaster. I've got several other podcasts, like we do this show, but I've got my own shows and stuff like that. Google Podcasts has not been an impact whatsoever in terms of numbers and things like that. It's primarily been, it's Apple, it's Spotify, it's Pocket Cast, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. It's Overcast. It's all the other, podcast catchers that are out there. Google Podcasts rarely even broke into the top 10 of like download sources for me. So I'm not surprised that they're winding this experiment down. It's just a bummer. So
yeah, because it's a nice feature, right? And you kind of, Google Results does so much of this, like nicely packaging results to kind of like augment or facilitate you interacting with it, whatever it is, like YouTube videos or kind of other things. It's kind of sad, honestly, because podcasting is still a big part of like most of our internet, media lives. And I mean, it makes sense because it's a feature, so it needs maintenance. But yeah, it is a bummer. So,
yeah, I mean, because there's so much potential for what Google potentially could do with podcasts, and they're just not doing. Yeah, but it's not making money, so I make sense. It makes sense. I understand. It's a bummer. So anyway, all right.
Well, so from features lost to features gained, I got a little good news for y'all, especially for folks that are rocking the Wear OS 3 watches, because recently there was a really great feature to land on your Wear OS, and that was basically if you have an LTE connected Wear OS device, you could actually use turn-by-turn Google Maps navigation without having to be connected to your smartphone. So if y'all are running like our dear host Ron, or if you just, kind of like doing any other activity where you don't want to have to worry about bringing your phone and you still want to have navigation, if you had an LTE connected Wear device, you had it. There was one hiccup though, is that because when you put your wrist down, of course, the display will turn off. And so there goes your turn-by-turn navigation. So what they have done is actually updated the navigation app on Wear OS 3 to have always on display support for turn-by-turn navigation. So if you're out and you're taking advantage of that, kind of like Wear OS 3 only turn-by-turn, now, if, you're running and your wrist goes down, rather than kind of like, sleeping or just like turn the display off, you'll actually get that always on display with a list of directions. And of course, if you are worried about battery life or just privacy, someone looking at your wrist and seeing where you're going, you can turn that off. But if you are someone who has already used and enjoyed this turn-by-turn feature, now got a little bit better with the always on display, just making sure that you always have those directions up. So I don't know. I just, this is that kind of like little teeny little tweak to quality of life that is, I don't know. I just love stuff like this where it takes a good feature and just makes it just a little more usable, a little more accessible. So there you go.
Gotta love it. So cool. All right. So there's some updates on apps, but after a brief hiatus, our good friend JR Raphael of Android Intelligence is back with a tip for us this week. And we were talking earlier about Samsung, about bloatware and about Samsung mid-range phones. But JR is actually, he's focusing on Samsung this week. So those of you Samsung users, you might want to listen up to this one. So JR, take it away.
Hey, so this is the week that Samsung's latest and greatest Galaxy gadgets make their way out into the world and into the hands of many an eager Android fan. With that in mind, I thought it'd be fun to take a look at a few cool new gesture-based shortcuts that Samsung snuck into its Android 13 setup. And they'll actually work on any Samsung phone with Android 13 on it. You don't even need the fancy schmancy newness necessarily. 3 things in total, and they all revolve around multitasking. Ready? All right, up first, with Samsung's version of Android 13, you can swipe up from the bottom of your screen with 2 fingers to get directly into Android's split screen mode. And that's where you can see 2 apps on your screen together at the same time. Pretty handy, right? That split screen function has been kind of out of the way and buried in Android for a long time now. I don't know about you, but I always find it's mostly out of sight, out of mind for me because of that. So this really goes a long way in making it feel more like a prominent, integrated part of the main interface and something that's never more than a single swipe away. Next, you can swipe your finger down diagonally from the top corner of your screen to shift any app you're using into a floating pop-up window. Yeah, how about that? It's a slightly different twist on using two apps together at the same time, and something that could potentially be useful in certain situations. Being able to make it happen so easily anytime is definitely a nice little touch. Finally, if you go into Samsung's overview area, the thing that shows you all your recently used apps when you swipe up from the bottom of the screen with one finger and then stop, you can find a cool new hidden shortcut for moving any app into that split screen view or that pop-up view right from there. Just press and hold your finger onto any app's card in that area, then drop it in the middle of the screen to put it into a pop-up window, or drag it to the top or bottom of your screen to zip right into that split screen mode and see it alongside any other app you want. Now, these are technically all experimental features. All that means, though, is that you've got to go into your phone's settings, find and flip one little switch before they'll show up and be available to you, before you really even know that they're there and that they exist in the first place. And don't worry, it's actually really, really easy to do. Just head into your system's settings in Samsung's Android 13 setup, scroll down and tap the line for Advanced Features, then tap Labs, and activate the toggles next to Swipe for Pop-Up View and Swipe for Split Screen. That's it. Pretty cool stuff, and I'm not gonna lie, it's stuff that makes me just a teensy-weensy little bit jealous as a longtime Pixel user. I'm holding on to hope that maybe Google will take inspiration from this and bring some of the same sort of stuff into Android itself at some point down the line. It really just does seem like a super sensible set of additions to the existing Android gesture setup, don't you think? Hey, while we're thinking about shortcuts, just a reminder that I've got a killer week-long e-course all about awesome Android shortcuts. It's called the Android Shortcut Super Course. Imagine that. And it's just jam-packed with really cool efficiency-enhancing tricks for flying around your phone like a pro. It's completely free for you, of course. Just head over to androidintel.net/twit and look for the Shortcut Supercourse button at the bottom of the page to get started. That site again is androidintel.net/twit. I'll see you there, and I'll see you right back here for even more tasty Android treats next week.
Well, thank you, JR. It's always good to get a handy tip for Samsung users, but Huynh, I always feel like whenever we wrap up one of JR's tips, we need to unpack it because there's a lot going on in this one, in addition to the gestures.
You mean a shirt, or do you?
It's a great shirt. It's a great shirt. It looks like it's his Android. It might be one of his shirts. It looks like his Android Intelligence logo.
It is.
On what looks like a Heinz style can of beans or something, sort of thing like that. Very cool shirt. And also, I also appreciate how all of JR's contextual examples all include past episodes of All About Android or Google searches for Jason or me or anybody else on the show. So yeah, it's kind of freaky, but.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think Pac Northwest noted, it's a nice way to get you and that video of you trying Google Glass. And I have to say, like, for some reason, every 10 days, YouTube is like, hey, you want to watch this episode of All About Android? And it's always the one where you're trying Google Glass. So it's always like that thumbnail. I think it's just like a classic episode.
It's part of my Android legacy. I'm quite proud of it. And I will say the live stream chat room is popping during JR's things, because not only did Pac NW point out, focusing me on that in Google Glass, but hats off to Scooter X for saying he heard that JR was not on last week because he ran out of t-shirts, which is very funny. So good stuff. Well, thank you, JR. You keep us informed. We appreciate it. We love your wardrobe. Good stuff. So with that, up next, we're going to hear from you, the Android community, with your feedback. And every week, every day, you can write to us at AAA@twit.tv or call us at 347-SHOW-AAA. And we do say you can send in video messages or voice messages. And I'm really excited this week. One of you took us up on that. But first, Huynh, you got the first email, which is just a old-fashioned written prose email. But still, it's pretty cool. Take it away.
Yes. So a few years back. Oh, sorry. So my bad. So this is from, oh dear. My bad if I mispronounced your name. Laurentiu Roman. I really apologize. And you can send me either a written email or a voicemail correcting my pronunciation if I just got it totally wrong. But Laurentiu writes us saying, a few years back, Florence Ion recommended a podcast app that had a simple interface, Podkicker, but I had already been using it since my first Android phone, the Galaxy S3. I loved it because it had a very simple interface, no ads, no recommendations, didn't even have variable speed playback when I first started using it. Paid for the Pro version as soon as I could. This week, it started to show a couple of sponsored, not suggested or recommended, podcasts in the main tab of the Pro version of the app with no way to remove them, just an option to subscribe. I dug very superficially, and an ad entity called Maple Media seems to have acquired the app from original developer and seems to be serving ads in the Pro version too. I hate it now. I totally understand. Can you or a listener recommend an alternative app that has a similarly simple interface? It has to be a single purchase and not have ads, recommendations, etc. If it has a dark black theme, that would be a bonus, but not a deal breaker. Thanks, Laurentiu Roman. And I'm, again, really sorry if I mispronounced your name. Yeah. I don't know, Ryan, I think you're definitely the stronger podcast listener between the two of us. Do you have an idea?
I mean, yeah, it's if you're watching the video show now, you can see what Burke just pulled up, and 100% it's Pocket Casts. Pocket Casts is the only podcast app for Android, as far as I'm concerned. It is as close to ubiquity for Android as Apple Podcasts is for Apple. It's what I use, and the great thing is that it has a dark mode, which is great. It's got that there. There are no ads in it. I do pay for the extra version or whatever, but I've never seen an ad in the app ever. But the way the app is set up and organized is that you can subscribe to you do use the Discover section to go search for podcasts and subscribe to them. But once you subscribe to all your podcasts, the listen tab is where you kind of you know, I'm pulling it up on my phone right now, make sure I'm using the right vernacular here. But yeah, the podcast tab, which is the first tab on the lower left of the nav, is just all your podcasts that you subscribe to. If you tap Discover, that's where they show you what's trending or what's they're recommending, or, you know, their kind of curation, but you never need to go look at that ever. You do need to go there to go search for a podcast to go subscribe to it. But once you hit subscribe, you can stay on that podcast tab and never see anything else and keep it completely contained in your experience. And it's got great little other little functionality tweaks, like you can increase the playback speed, which some people love. I don't. I go crazy when I try to listen on podcasts at 1.5 speed. It's like chipmunks in my head, but people like that. But one thing I do utilize is that they have the ability to, via software, boost the volume of the podcasts, because a lot of podcasts are amateur made or not by people who are as tight as audio kind of professionals as others might be. And there are some podcasts I listen to where the audio level is lower, and I'm on the subway in New York and I need a little boost. I just tap that. It makes it louder so I can hear it a little better over the noise of the subway. So, I think Pocket Cast is the bee's knees, and Laurentiu, I think you would it will solve a lot of the problems that you're laying out here in your email. So
yeah, and just for extra flavor, my husband and I both use Pocket Cast. I pay for premium; he does not, and he does not get ads. And I mean, it's up to you. I know you said single purchase. I believe I looked at Podkicker. It's kind of a rarity in the App Store where it is a single purchase. It's $35, so it's kind of hard these days to find an app that isn't ads. That isn't ad supported and that is single price, just because I think it's kind of a hard model it's just not a popular model right now. But my husband's super happy without premium on Pocket Cast, and I mean, even the premium version I think is just niceties. It's kind of impressive. I kind of just looked at the other top podcasting apps in the App Store.
4.0 rating.
4.0 rating. And most of the other popular ones are ad supported, so you're gonna get your banner ads, I think, or something like that. So it's just ignore that Discover tab, just pretend it ain't there, and that's what I use too. So yeah,
it works. So cool. All right, well, for our next listener email, it's actually a voicemail. This is from Mike from California. So Burke, roll the voicemail.
Hello, AAA crew. I wanted to ask your opinion. When will we see the first Android phones with satellite connectivity? And who will that be from? I've made up my mind that my next phone has to have satellite, with the amount of time that I spend off the grid, which is not quite enough for a dedicated device like a Garmin InReach, but enough that I want to have that safety net available. Thanks, and this is Mike from Camarillo, California. Longtime fan of the show.
All right, Mike, great question. For those who are keeping track, Apple did announce that there would be iPhone with satellite support in late 2022. That's when they announced it. Actually, in September 2022, they announced that the satellite feature for the iPhone 14. So I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict when or who the first Android satellite phone will be or will come from. But there was an article in earlier this year in January up on the BBC that spotlighted a partnership between Iridium, the phone firm, which makes the original satellite phone, and Qualcomm to bring satellite connectivity to Android smartphones later this year. So we'll see what comes from this partnership between Iridium and Qualcomm, and we'll see who will be the first manufacturer to utilize satellite phones. I mean, Huynh, I don't know, have you heard anything about Android satellite phones yet, or?
Not personally, but to be honest, not paying as much attention as I could be, but it is kind of fun to see like the tit for tat there and seeing how we might get how the satellite support kind of ends up on Android. So exciting stuff. Very exciting.
Yeah. Very cool. Very exciting. So you can call in. This guy, Mike, he just attached a WAV file of his audio. So you could do that on your own emails when you want to. It'd be totally fine. But I'm excited to say that for this week's email of the week, I put out the call on Twitter saying, if you want to be the email of the week, it could be you. And we did have a lucky winner. So Huynh, take it away.
Absolutely. And the email of the week is from a very spirited nerd. I forgot that we were doing the fanfare. I heard it, and then my brain was just like, "Be done with that." So yes. So the email of the week
never gets old. Never gets old.
Never gets old. It's from a spirited nerd, and actually a friend to many, a Twitch person on the interwebs, and that is Mr. Lincoln C. Chinnery III. Good to see you, sir. Thank you for the question. And he writes us to ask, "Dear AAA team. First, I am a longtime fan. I go back to Android Arena days, good times. I also met Ron once at the NY Comic-Con years ago. He gave me some great recommendations on Weird West comic books. Any wellness. My question is a simple one with a complicated answer. Is there any way I can update the software on my Fossil smartwatch? It's Gen 1, and I'd like to try to get it up and running. I made an attempt a few years ago with no joy. I was hoping the AAA team cued Burke to play the A-Team theme.
We don't have that.
No,
we can't.
We don't have that. All right, my
Not
bad.
prepared.
Imagine, or hum it to yourselves. Oh, that is not a plan coming together, Burke. That's not it.
I'm sorry.
But anyway, I was hoping the AAA team would have some suggestions. Thank you for all the apps, information, and entertainment."
This is a tough one.
Yeah, it's a tough one. So I don't know, like if anyone else has any ideas, please let us know, write in. But and this is a little bit out of my realm of experience and expertise, but as I understand it, like for example, if you wanted to try to load, Wear OS 3 on your Fossil smartwatch Gen 1, you just can't. It's, for example, Wear OS 3, I think, requires the Snapdragon Wear 4100 and above chipset. So there's something about, Wear OS and the way that it actually requires certain, kind of firmware, different levels of kind of hardware support that unfortunately probably make it not able to support any of the newer OSs. Again, I wish I could give you more specific technical detail. This is just Deb hand waving this, but there's something about kind of like the interaction and abstractions of like the hardware to the software that unfortunately not going to jive, I think, for the Fossil smartwatch Gen 1. Was that 2015, 2016? That's been around for a bit. That was a while ago. Yeah. And I think especially with smaller devices, kind of compatibility and stuff gets a little bit harder because it's a smaller device. I presume things are a little bit harder and you got to kind of optimize. So that also tends to kind of cut you off at different parts of the, smartwatch evolutionary chain. So I mean, I have tons of devices like that where I just wish I could keep it on longer, but I think especially with things like smartwatches where the hardware and software is a little more specialized, it's a little bit harder. So, but I could be totally wrong. And if I am, please someone politely send us feedback or politely let me know in feedback or offer Mr. Lincoln some better advice. But, for a great question that definitely got my dev brain working and for being a longtime fan and a friend to all of us at the show, Mr. Lincoln C. Chinnery III, that is why you are our email of the week.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for writing in and reminding everybody, it was a quiet week for emails. So make sure you get your emails in at AAA@twit.tv, and bonus points if you include a video or a voicemail. But like Mike from California, keep it short, keep it like 30 seconds or so, and we'll run it though. You could be part of the All About Android community and fame by getting on the show. This is your chance, everyone. Cool. So with that, that's going to wrap it up for this week. Great time talking Android 14 and hardware and all that fun stuff. Hwin, where can people find you after the show ends on the internet?
Yeah, on the internet, you can find me on the internet. I have a website, randomlytyping.com, where you can see some of the more devy life stuff that I'm doing, talks, videos of those talks and codes related to that talks. If you really want to see my code, sorry, ahead of time. Otherwise, you can find me on social media places at Queen Code Monkey. That's probably going to be me. Birdsite, Mastodon.social. But yeah.
Right on.
Come to find me for Android dev stuff.
Cool. And as we mentioned, you should follow Michel Roman over on Twitter and check him out. All his writing over at XDA Developers. It's great to see. And for me, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at RonXO. And check out JR Raphael's Android Intelligence newsletter. So much great information there. We love JR. JR is fantastic. And huge thanks to Burke and Victor for making all the show work behind the scenes. Thank you, Burke. This has been a smooth one, don't you think?
Yeah, actually. Pretty good.
I just jinked us in the last minute. So yes. So Jason will be back next week. I hope we'll be definitely be looking forward to that. But in the meantime,
we'll undo Magic Eraser. We'll undo.
In the meantime, you can show your loyalty and enjoyment of everything that Twit has to offer by joining Club Twit, our ad-free subscription tier. You get all of our shows with no ads, and also an exclusive Twit Plus podcast feed with tons of extra content and a members-only Discord. And that's where the real fun is at, in the members-only Discord in there. And this is all just $7 per month, or you can pay for a full year, just $84. It doesn't get better than that. Go to twit.tv/clubtwit. And I know I try very hard during our pre-show to give you extra content to go into that Twit Plus podcast feed. So I hope you enjoy that every week in and out. Just for you members, we love you. Thank you so much, everyone there. And thank you for listening to the show. That's going to wrap it up for this week. This podcast publishes every Tuesday evening. You can subscribe over at twit.tv/AAA. And as I mentioned, you can leave a voicemail 347-SHOW-AAA or email us at AAA@twit.tv. That's AAA@twit.tv. And until next time, we'll see you on All About Android. Keep being faithful to your Android devices. All right, everybody? We'll see you next time. So long. Empty chair.
Empty chair.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I am Ant Pruitt, and I am the host of Hands-On Photography here on Twit TV. I know you got yourself a fancy smartphone, you got yourself a fancy camera, but your pictures are still lacking. Can't quite figure out what the heck shutter speed means? Watch my show. I got you covered. Want to know more about just the ISO and exposure triangle in general? Yeah, I got you covered. Or if you got all of that down, you want to get into lighting, making things look better by changing the lights around you. I got you covered on that too. So check us out each and every Thursday here on the network. Go to twit.tv/hop and subscribe today.